In the vastness of the ocean, where the waves danced like fluid shadows under the whims of the wind, Jonas sailed, alone, on his little boat. The sea was his domain, a space where he felt free, in communion with nature, but also on alert. Since his childhood, the sea had taught him profound lessons: respect, patience, and vigilance. She was a silent friend, a companion in solitude, but also a capricious mistress, whose moods could change in the blink of an eye, as quiet as they were devastating. Today, however, something seemed different. Jonas stood on the deck of his boat, a simple skiff that he maneuvered with skill, his rough fisherman's hands guiding the sails. The sun, high in the sky, bathed the sea in golden light, creating a sea of calm, almost unreal blue, with waves so gentle that they almost seemed to fall asleep. The horizon stretched infinitely before him, a perfect mix of sky and sea that merged into a blue canvas, without borders. But that day, the sea seemed to hold a secret. There was a strange stillness in the air, a kind of solemn calm that Jonas wasn't used to feeling. The wind was barely blowing, as if the sea itself was paused, waiting. Jonas felt this atmosphere in an almost palpable way, as if the sea was whispering in his ear, asking him to pay attention to something much larger than himself, something invisible, suspended in the air. His thoughts wandered for a moment as he cast his fishing rod, as he did every day. But deep down, he couldn't escape this presentiment, an unpleasant feeling that pushed him to constantly look into the distance, as if the ocean was going to offer him a revelation that he wasn't yet ready to understand. It wasn't the sea that was dangerous today. It was the invisible that seemed to be getting closer, an unknown buried in the depths of the sea. The calm of the sea suddenly broke when a slight movement caught his eye.
There, in the distance, floating adrift, a strange shape loomed on the horizon.
At first glance it was just a vague dot, a piece of debris perhaps, or an illusion of the sea. But something about the shape intrigued him. His eyes, which had seen thousands of sea creatures, suddenly moved. Jonas narrowed his eyes. The object seemed to get closer to him as the waves carried it along. A raft. A makeshift raft, made of floating wooden planks, warped by time and waves. There was no sail, no engine.
Only a broken object, drifting with the current.
Jonas leaned forward, his mind confused. He was used to seeing floating objects, pieces of wood, forgotten wrecks, but this raft seemed different. He was too small, too fragile, to be simple debris. The closer he got, the more he made out the figure resting on it. A shiver ran down his spine. On the raft, a small being, a child, solitary and strange, was there, asleep in a blanket that seemed too big for him. The contrast was striking. The ocean of Olympian calm around the raft made the image even more surreal.
A frozen, almost unreal scene.
A baby.
A baby on the open sea, alone.
The sea, usually so vast and unforgiving, suddenly seemed to hold its breath, ready to reveal its secret. Jonas approached again, his heart racing. He couldn't believe what he saw. The little being, who seemed to be no more than a few months old, was peaceful, his eyes closed, as if he had never known the violence of the sea, nor even the anguish of being lost. But there was something disturbing in this tranquility.
A calm too perfect, almost too perfect to be real.
When he was close enough, Jonas reached out, slowly at first, his mind working to comprehend what he had just discovered. The sea had become silent, as if waiting for himself to make a decision. A shiver of fear crept up his spine. Maybe it was a mirage, an illusion created by the sea and the sun? Perhaps this was the product of his prolonged isolation at sea? But no. His eyes were clear.
It wasn't a dream.
He leaned a little closer. The baby's eyes then opened slowly, as if he had been waiting for the precise moment. The little girl's big eyes fixed on him, with surprising intensity. It was as if she recognized him, as if she knew he would be there to save her. A strange shiver came over him. His eyes were full of life, of intelligence, but also of an inexplicable depth, as if this little being knew things that no man was supposed to know. Jonas' instincts, the ones he had honed over years on the waves, screamed at him to pull back. He knew the sea was capricious, that the appearance of calm could be deceptive. The child, alone and vulnerable, could well be hiding a trap, a danger that he did not yet perceive. But another, more visceral instinct was awakening in him, an instinct of protection, of silent kinship with the little creature, an instinct that pushed him to act, not to leave the child alone. There was something bigger than the sea playing out here. The sea, at first calm and serene, began to change disturbingly. What seemed like a peaceful, almost unreal day suddenly transformed. The waves, until then gentle and rhythmic, rose up against him, like powerful monoliths rising from the abyss. They hit Jonas' boat with unexpected violence, lifting it and making it rock in uncontrollable movements. The wind picked up suddenly, an icy gust that rocked the boat and blew into his face, biting him like a knife. The air, previously sweet, had become humid, almost salty, and each breath seemed to carry the intensity of the angry heavens. The sea was no longer a docile companion. She was rebelling, seemed to want to push him away, to prevent him from continuing his action. It was as if the entire ocean, in all its majesty, rejected the idea of human intervention, as if the sea had its own rules, which man did not understand, and which it did not wish to share. The waves rose higher and higher, crashing with a crash, sending bursts of salt water in all directions. Jonas, although solid in his foundations as a seasoned fisherman, felt a dull anguish in his gut. It was as if the sea itself had become an insurmountable obstacle, an indomitable entity willing to do anything to preserve its secret. But then, despite the rising storm, another instinct in Jonas emerged, a primitive and indomitable human instinct. The baby in her arms was her only anchor, her only link to reality. The cold bit into his skin, the sea roared around him, but nothing could extinguish this inner flame that pushed him forward. He had seen the distress in the child's eyes, and his humanity, that deep and indefensible part of himself, took precedence over caution. He fought against the swell, leaned over the edge of the boat, and reached out with astonishing speed, grabbing the rickety raft. His fingers quivered at the contact with the damp wood, but he managed, with a firm gesture, to draw the baby towards him, bringing him back to his chest with almost frenzied care. The contact of the baby against his skin was immediate, electric. An unusual warmth spread through his arms, as if an invisible force was passing through him. It was as if a vital current ran through the child, an ancient and mysterious link that connected him to him. The baby, in a last breath of energy, emitted a faint cry, a sound almost inaudible but full of life, as if the child, in his fragile state, was struggling to hold on to life. This cry pierced the air around them, but the sea did not respond. On the contrary, the wind intensified, the waves seemed to want to engulf everything around them. Jonas, with a rapid movement, stood up, folding the child against him, holding him preciously, like a fragile treasure that he did not want to lose. The sky, which had been a bright blue moments earlier, suddenly transformed. Dark, ominous clouds pressed over him, a black veil spreading rapidly, covering the sun with alarming speed. The daylight turned into a thick mist, almost palpably dense, which seemed to engulf the ship and the ocean around it. Visibility faded as the mist rose, until sea and sky merged, leaving no boundary between the two. Everything seemed to dissolve into a strange torpor. Jonas felt disoriented, as if the world around him was losing its meaning, as if the familiar landmarks of the ocean were fading under the pressure of a larger, older event. The wind howled around him, but he felt disconnected from the storm. He was no longer sure if he was still in reality. The waves that trembled around his boat were no longer just waves. They were living creatures, natural forces aware of their power. It was the sea in all its cruelty, but also in all its majesty, and Jonas was a simple witness, an involuntary actor, in this merciless spectacle. Through this veil of mist, Jonas saw a glint. Something glowed around the child's neck. He leaned a little closer, his trembling hands caressing the baby's fragile skin to reveal a locket, a small golden pendant hanging by a chain that glimmered with a faint, almost supernatural light in the fading glow of the day. Intrigued, he gently untied the chain around the child's neck, discovering the symbol engraved in the metal. A 5-pointed star, perfect in its proportions, with a simple but strangely powerful design. The star seemed alive, as if it were emitting an invisible energy, palpable in the air that had become heavy around it. This symbol awakened in Jonas a distant memory, almost forgotten, buried in the recesses of his mind. He remembered the stories of his childhood, the legends his mother told him when he was still a young boy. Mysterious tales of a child of the seas, a being that the ocean would one day generate, carrying an ancient and impenetrable power. The child would be, she said, a catalyst for a profound change in world history, a being from the waves, guided by the mysterious forces of the ocean. Legend said that whoever saved this child would be bound to a much greater destiny, one that he could neither escape nor understand until it was too late. Jonas forced himself to push these thoughts away. He could not get carried away by such superstitions. The sea was dangerous, but he was not a man who allowed himself to be dominated by myths. Yet something in his gut, a loud intuition, told him that what he was experiencing was not ordinary. He didn't yet know why, but he felt that this child and this symbol were not part of the world he knew. He had the impression that this meeting would change his life, and even more, that it would change the very history of what he had always believed. But the stories were just stories, right? As he looked at the child in his arms, a strange warmth, gentle but intense, spread through him. It was not just the warmth of the child's life against him, but something deeper, something inexplicable, like an ancient bond, invisible but palpable. It was as if, at that precise moment, a veil was lifted from his mind, a silent and profound revelation. He didn't even have time to think further when the boat was rocking beneath him, light, as if an invisible force was pushing him backwards, urging him to move away from the sea. The sea, which had been almost unreally calm, transformed into a wilder, more insistent being. The water around him stirred suddenly, with an unsettling energy, as if coming to life and reacting to his presence. The wind, gentle at first, became more urgent, blowing with a strange force, carrying an urgency he had never felt. This wind, almost like an alert, carried within it invisible murmurs, noises almost imperceptible but nevertheless present.
It shook the boat, pushing it in unexpected directions, like a giant invisible hand at work.
The waves, which until then seemed almost dancing, became more and more menacing, rising with increasing power. They rose, rising higher and higher, breaking with incredible violence against the sides of the boat, threatening to engulf it under their weight. A dull noise, like a distant rumble, was heard, a terrifying vibration that seemed to come from the depths of the ocean. It wasn't just the sound of waves crashing, it was like an echo from the sea itself, a call, an alert, a warning that Jonas could not ignore. The sea, the element he had always faced with a certain confidence, suddenly seemed alive, as if it were aware of his presence, as if it had recognized something in him, or in the child, something he could not understand. It was then that a clear vision crossed Jonas's mind, a vision that grabbed him without warning.
An image of a world submerged beneath the waves, of an immense and mysterious city, once brilliant and full of life, now drowned beneath the waters.
Ancient ruins, covered in coral and sand, exuded an aura of oblivion and secrecy. Jonas saw the remains of this lost world, an ancient world, whose very existence seemed to have died out in the indifference of centuries, protected by the sea itself. The child in her arms was not just an abandoned baby. No, he carried within him the heritage of this submerged world. He was the heir of a lost civilization, a child of the waves, a child chosen by the ocean to be its witness, its messenger. The sea, like a protective entity, had not simply saved him. She had placed him there, in Jonas's arms, as a catalyst to awaken ancient forces, long-buried secrets. Without a word, a certainty took hold of him. He was no longer the simple fisherman who lived from day to day, seeking to earn his livelihood from the ocean. No, he was now a witness, an actor, an essential part of a story much bigger than himself. He felt a heavy responsibility placed on his shoulders, an ancient and immutable weight. He had no choice. He had to protect this child, and through him, preserve this secret that the sea itself seemed to want to hide from men. He was no longer a simple passive witness. He was now an actor in an age-old drama, a drama unfolding far beyond what he had ever imagined. At that precise moment, as if the sea itself had heard his commitment, the mist that had risen around him began to dissipate. In a few seconds, she moved away, as if a veil had suddenly lifted over the horizon. The ocean, which had been raging a few moments earlier, calmed down, regaining a strange, almost supernatural serenity. The waves reduced to peaceful ripples, and the sea became as calm as a mirror reflection. The sky, which had been darkened by clouds, regained its limpid blue color, soft and welcoming. The sun peeked through the dissipated mist, bathing the sea in a soft, golden light, as if the ocean, in a final breath of gratitude, offered its blessing. Jonas felt a deep peace, but also a strange feeling of loss, as if everything he had known up to that moment was slipping away, giving way to a new and incomprehensible reality. The child in her arms was not just a burden. He was a sign, a messenger, a call to a greater adventure. He was no longer a simple man, a solitary fisherman. He was now one of the last witnesses to a mystery forgotten for too long. The sea had chosen him for a reason, and that reason would soon reveal itself. The winds had become calm, carrying a light, almost gentle breeze. The boat, which had been rocking violently, stabilized, sliding slowly through the calm water. The once distant port was now getting closer, but Jonas knew this was not the end of his journey. No, it was only the beginning. The start of an adventure that would lead him to the heart of ancient secrets, of stories buried under the sea, in the ruins of a lost world. He felt within himself a new determination, a call stronger than anything he had ever known. Returning to the port, his gaze fell on the little baby he was still holding in his arms, peaceful and serene. Jonas now knew that this child was not just a child. He was the keeper of a secret, the beginning of a journey that would mark history in ways he could not yet imagine. The sea, in choosing him for this mission, had linked him to something greater than himself, something he should honor, protect, and understand. Thus begins Jonah's journey. A journey that will take him from the shores of simplicity to the dawn of an ancient and powerful truth.
A journey from a solitary fisherman to witness a forgotten destiny.
A journey where history, long buried beneath the waves, will finally be revealed.